Hello there. Manufacturing apprenticeships are in crisis thanks to the pandemic, according to the latest In-Comm Training Barometer, which says 64% of manufacturers have failed to invest in apprenticeships in the last year. At a time when so many jobs in manufacturing are on the line thanks to the pandemic, this is a very strong warning that action should be taken now to prevent what the barometer calls a lost generation of apprentices. I'm joined by Verity Davidge, who's Policy Director at Make UK. Verity, welcome. Coincidental with this very negative news, we did hear yesterday that BAE Systems and JLR between them are taking on over 1,500 apprentices this year, which is absolutely fantastic. But the problem isn't with big companies, is it? It's with the huge number of SMEs we've got in the manufacturing sector.
That is what we are seeing amongst Make UK members. So, it is National Apprenticeship Week, and it's a time where we really want to be celebrating all that apprentices bring, new ideas, great attitude. And really, the manufacturing sector has always been one that really champions apprentices and trains them and makes sure they're making those investments to create the next generation of innovators, creators and makers. And like you say, we see a lot of larger companies still kind of take forward their apprenticeship programs, which is great to see. But what we are slightly concerned about is the number of SMEs that are actually pulling back their apprenticeship programs in light of the pandemic. So we recently asked companies whether they're planning to recruit apprentices, and around 45% said they were planning to this year. Now, that may seem high in other sectors, but actually that's a figure that would normally stand at around 75%. So you can really see the impact that the Covid-19 pandemic is having on manufacturers' ability to offer apprenticeship training.
Yeah, that's borne out by the report, which said that 50% have shelved plans to take on apprentices this year, and 50% are even cutting training budgets. Can we possibly rely on this just being a pandemic issue and then we can bounce out of it and get back to normal?
I think if we look historically at the trends, and in particular the trends that we have seen since the introduction of the Apprenticeship Levy, we saw it was a very much downward trend. And what the pandemic has done has really just exacerbated that. So if we look to the latest government data, the number of apprenticeship starts is actually down 28% year on year. And we look to the manufacturing engineering apprenticeships, which normally are far more resilient in taking kind of a turn for the worse. The number of starts have actually halved in comparison to this time last year. So that really shows the kind of a hold the pandemic has taken. But we cannot ignore the fact that this was a downward trend even before the pandemic, and it started, unfortunately, with the introduction of the Apprenticeship Levy.
Well, I was going to say the In-Comm Training report did have a kind of coded message in there. It's called for simplified grant scheme for apprenticeships. The fact is the Apprenticeship Levy just hasn't worked. What do you think could replace it?
I think rather than replace the Apprenticeship Levy outright, what we need to see is fundamental reform. The Apprenticeship Levy has become embedded for a lot of companies within how they operate apprenticeships. But business groups such as Make UK and indeed wider stakeholders have said from the start that it needs reform. And really, we are still making the same case that we made almost 4 years ago to say, if you introduce this, it needs to look like this. And unfortunately, we've not really seen any kind of real move from the government to fix what is needed fixing.
Have you had any indications whatsoever that they have been listening? Because, I've been reporting on this for donkey's years and it doesn't seem to get any better.
We've seen tweaks around the edges, I would say. We've seen the introduction of transferring of levy funds, for example, so a large company can gift their funds to smaller firms. But that doesn't actually help those large companies who have funds to spend, but are unable to spend them. Now, at a time when companies are pretty cash strapped and they have a pot of money sitting there waiting to be used on training and they can't use it, it does seem that the time is now for reform. And so what we would like to see, for example, for those levy paying companies is the ability to spend those funds on wider costs, such as capital expenditure, which we know for our sector is pretty significant. But at the moment, they can't spend their levy funds out of that. So actually what they have to do is kind of put their hands in their pockets, and unfortunately at the moment there isn't the cash available.
Well, in terms of cash from the government, the furlough scheme does appear to have helped companies retain apprenticeships, which we can only say is very good news. The furlough scheme inevitably has got an end date on it. I believe it's April this year, but there is a budget coming up in March. What's Make UK saying to Rishi Sunak about what should be in that budget, specifically around workforce support?
So when it comes to the job retention scheme, we have made clear that it needs to be extended to a minimum of the end of Q3. What has been quite frustrating is that the job retention scheme has been extended, but often the decisions have been made at the 11th hour. So what we've seen amongst Make UK members is half of companies already made redundancies and a third still considering even more. Now, I can't say we could have saved all those jobs, but I think we could have saved some of those jobs if we had had, a better idea of that it was going to be extended. I don't think we can simply wait until the weeks of April to work out whether it's going to be extended again. And on apprentices, we've made some kind of big, bold asks, again, around the Apprenticeship Levy, greater flexibility. And where there is offers of support, such as the incentive payments, actually, they are a drop in the ocean in comparison to the cost of a manufacturing engineering apprenticeship. It will do little to drive up the numbers in our sectors. There needs to be bolder measures. So what we have said to government is, look at how you can cover the costs of when an apprentice is out of the business. So within their training provider or college, that would do so much more than simply saying, here's £2,000 towards the cost of what is arguably a significant amount of money.
You mentioned colleges just there. Of course, FE colleges in particular, further education, absolutely critical to making the apprenticeship scheme across the nation work. The government came out with a skills white paper a couple of weeks ago, which had some very positive signs about future FE funding, which has been, frankly, slashed in recent years. So it's just trying to reinstate some of the cash that's already been lost. What's your reaction at Make UK to the skills white paper?
I think it's definitely a step in the right direction. So there's a huge focus on the need for higher technical education, and that seems to be completely missing from all policy decisions and reforms we've seen to date. We desperately need more kind of technician level support, and that's where a lot of the kind of focus is. And it's great to see that the FE white paper talks about the need to look at levels 4 and 5 and actually wants to have the ambition for more institutes of technology to be widespread across the UK. So there's lots of good moves and the right direction. Of course, we know that kind of implementation is a lot different. So what we don't want to see is a target set and then simply kind of pull back or another initiative taking its place. We need more of a longer term strategy now.
Longer term strategy, yes. I think everybody in manufacturing would like to see some of that. Verity, we've been talking about the way the pandemic has really damaged apprenticeships this year, but you made that critical point that actually the take-up of apprenticeships or the offering of apprenticeships was already in decline. We can't go on like this. The manufacturing sector desperately needs young people to come and work in it, and it desperately needs more training to be carried on at every level of the sector. I mean, is this entirely in government's hand, or should manufacturers be doing more for themselves?
I think manufacturers themselves are stepping up to the plate. So Make UK recently came together with the TUC, Ingenuity, other sector skills councils and trade associations. And we wrote to the Secretary of State really setting out our case for a national skills task force and changes to the apprenticeship system. Now, that's quite rare that that's kind of suite of organisations come together and agree on something. Once we had our response from the Secretary of State, we actually realised there is a role we can play. So we've come together and set up a manufacturing skills task force. And what we are doing now is mapping out to work out where are the gaps that industry itself cannot fill, or where are the actual gaps that we need government support, so that we can go to government and say, we can do this without you, but we can do even more with your support and with the right policy reforms in place.
Well, that does seem very good news. Verity, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Verity Davidge, Policy Director at Make UK. This has been a special report from Zanut TV. I'm Nick Peters. Thank you for being with us. See you again soon.